We know the grid is undergoing massive change, which creates massive opportunities for local energy. The Energy Changemakers podcast offers rich conversations with industry leaders to help you and your company capture opportunities to build a decentralized grid. I'm your host, Elisa Wood. Welcome to the Energy Changemakers podcast. Hey everyone, this is Elisa Wood. Today's show is brought to you in partnership with Xendee, which will be holding University Week, a microgrid educational event, June 8th through 12th. It's online, it's no cost, and it's designed to accelerate the success of distributed energy and build a stronger community of microgrid industry stakeholders. Leading up to the event, I had the chance to speak with Michael Stadler, co-founder and chief technology officer at Xendee. We dove into what's unique about these times for microgrids, how microgrids are changing, and what the industry needs to better understand. It's good stuff. Take a listen. Oh, and I hope to see you at University Week. Again, that's June 8th through 12th. Hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
Good, very well. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the show. I'm very happy you're here today. I'm so excited about the event you have coming up. But before we get into that, I want to introduce you to our audience. Let's start by talking a little bit about what you do and what brought you to the microgrid world. What was your journey?
It has been a long journey. And actually, it happened by accident. I mean, it started in 2002. As a student, I just had the chance to work with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab up in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And before that, I even never heard about microgrids, right? But they started working on microgrids more than 20 years ago. And as a student, I just helped them out in 2002. And after 8 months, I was really sold on microgrids. And I wanted to come back and actually revisit this microgrid topic after my PhD. And then in 2005, as I finished my PhD, I just wanted back to Berkeley and started working my way through the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab system and started all the modeling work and microgrid work that we're doing today.
Wow, that's early 2002. I mean, microgrids have been around for a long time, but this current uptick or phase of microgrids really happened later than that after Superstorm Sandy. So you were very early to the table.
Yeah, we started all this modeling very early on. It was mostly for research for the Department of Energy. And we did microgrid projects in 2005 and 6, but all was funded by the California Energy Commission and the Department of Energy. And I did this until 2016. Then I moved out of the lab system and we started Xendee as a company. And then we just commercialized some of that knowledge and information into real products. So for me, actually, the commercialization started around 2016.
One of the reasons I love talking to Xendee is because you bring a unique insight to the industry because you work with so many different distributed energy companies. You see a lot. So I'm curious, how would you characterize the state of the industry as we go into University Week this year versus last year?
It's changing rapidly, and I think it has to do to some extent with the data center industry, because in the past we built microgrids for communities. The Department of Defense is a good client of us, and we built microgrids there. But it was really a fragmented market with a lot of smaller challenges, which we solved with microgrids, right? But starting more than a year ago, it became a big challenge for the data center industry because of the bottlenecks in the system. I just was at the data center conference a month ago, and it feels so different because people are really pressuring us because they need power. I mean, the utility industry is not capable of delivering the energy and especially the power that the data center world needs. And this is why it's changing for us. And I think there are some diagrams out there which show that when an exponential growth when it comes to microgrids for data centers. So it feels really progressive at the moment.
Yeah, there's just so many forces that are working to make microgrids an obvious solution for the data center problem that's out there right now, the energy crunch. Let me jump back a little bit, though. Is University Week in its second year? Is that correct?
No, we are starting this year. It's the first time.
Oh, I thought you did it last year, too.
We have a university program which we started a couple of years ago, which was about webinars, training, and education. But this year we decided to bundle all our work in 1 week and call it University Week.
Ah, okay. So it's an evolution of what you had started a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to start these education programs? What gap did you see in the industry?
Xendee is in the business of modeling microgrids, and we have our own modeling software, which is an optimization engine. And of course, people have designed microgrids in the past. But what we learned is it's a very fragmented approach, and people design something which is not lined up. Then later on, when you implement the microgrid, and you get completely different results. So it needs really a sophisticated planning and modeling approach. And we learned that this knowledge is really not available in the industry. I mean, people just do ad hoc approaches, they use Excel spreadsheets, and then they're always surprised at the end that the microgrid is not penciling out, right? And it's changing because in the past, there was a lot of funding going into the microgrid world. I mean, California Energy Commission, other states on the East Coast put a lot of money into this. And this is why modeling and figuring out how you design a microgrid was not that important because someone else was paying for this, right? But now in a changing world, when your own money is on the line here, people start asking the question about how efficient you can run such a microgrid. And now actually the planning and modeling is very important. And we realized early on that this knowledge is very limited. There are misperceptions. And this is why we work a lot with universities, national labs, to educate them on how it should be done so that they don't reinvent the wheel because we already have some technology which can do this. So this is one aspect. And the other aspect is really that we also learned that we have to work together here because we have this fragmented market. The vendors are focused on their technology. We are focused on the modeling. Then there are other people focused on the financing, the construction or implementation, right? But if we don't work together, we will have a challenge here because we're up against really big utilities or politics, which sometimes doesn't support microgrids. So if we work together, I think we can really grow this market exponentially. And this is why we are having this conference, this Energy University Week this year.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. I've heard people say that microgrids are a team sport. You have to bring several people together to do a microgrid.
Yeah.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit more about the data center situation, this increased demand and data centers becoming a market for microgrids. Are you seeing not just the conversation change, but are you seeing microgrids themselves change? Are they looking different as they serve data centers?
Of course, they look way bigger. I mean, we're really talking about large data centers, 500 megawatts, even up to 1 gigawatts, right? So these are really large microgrids. Traditionally, we were dealing with smaller microgrids in the kilowatt range. We did microgrids for the military, for communities. We were in the 100, 200, 300 kilowatt range. But now we're going way bigger. And this, of course, is also changing the technologies involved. So we see really a lot of natural gas-fired engines coming back and playing a role in this. So in the data center world, a lot of people are talking about natural gas engines, of course, in combination with other technologies, but at the moment, it's a lot about natural gas.
Yeah, that's a change that I've been fascinated by. It's going to be interesting to see if that holds or if it changes over time. Definitely one of the major shifts, because we used to see so many renewable and energy storage microgrids with natural gas as the kind of backup, right? But now we're seeing it as more of a primary form of generation.
Correct. I mean, the reason is it's about power. Microgrids that we designed and did in the past and still are doing in some regions were about carbon emissions and renewables, right? And they were funded by certain entities to do research around this and bring their carbon emissions down. But here with the data center, this is a different problem because we're talking about the infrastructure and the speed on how quickly we can implement this because the data centers, they have to grow fast. They cannot wait 8 or 10 years until the utility actually has time or all the regulations in place to upgrade the infrastructure. So they have to move fast at a large scale. And this is why these large engines, which are mature technology, are really a prime move at the moment.
Get them in there quickly. Yeah. Speed to power. I keep hearing that term over and over again. Let's talk about, you mentioned that you recently spoke at a data center conference. I understand you had a pretty big group of people in your session. I'm curious, when you were there or as you're talking to data center companies, what are the biggest misconceptions that you see about microgrids among that group?
Well, misconception. I think people realize that microgrids can be a solution. But at the same time, at the moment, at the beginning in this process, they don't realize that there's certain knowledge needed for this and also education. This is why we have Xendee University Week. So there's some disappointment at some point that there needs to be more sophisticated planning and engineering being involved than they were originally thinking. And then some of them flip back and think that they should wait for the utility. But at the end of the day, the utility is probably not going to save them. And I don't call it misperception, but I think the sooner that you get into this game as a data center, the sooner you will solve that problem. And I think some people realize this, and this is why we had, as you mentioned, so many people in that conference, because they recognize that microgrids are a solution, but at the same time, they also recognize that maybe they don't have the knowledge and they need a third party involved in this, or a company planning this microgrid and running it for them. So maybe acting like a small utility. And this is how we see it currently evolving, that third parties getting involved, working with us, planning and implementing the microgrid, but then also running it for the data center to provide that power. So I think it's not really a misperception, but it's a realization that, yeah, well, microgrids sound fine and interesting, but of course, they're not that easy, like just plugging something into the wall and getting power. So that's a learning process that I'm seeing here.
And so these third parties, who would be a third party, for example?
Developers, energy performance contractors. So really more sophisticated companies knowing something about microgrids and energy so that they really have the capability to plan and run the assets on behalf of the data center. So it's mostly engineering focused companies which act in kind of energy as a service company.
And what about conversely? Are there misconceptions you see the microgrid world bringing to data centers?
When it comes to the technology, right? I mean, this current push for engines is helping the microgrid world, but it can also be a challenge, I think, in the future because of the speed that they want to see here. I have the feeling that most of them don't really think very carefully about the deployed technologies. And one challenge I see here is that if they just install natural gas fired engines without waste heat utilization, so called CHP systems, then they run a very inefficient system, wasting a lot of waste heat, and at the same time, maybe locking themselves into a very inefficient system. So this goes back to the modeling. I think sophisticated modeling and guidance on how to expand the data center over time is really important. And I think it's a little bit short-sighted to just go with natural gas, very inefficient, actually, natural gas-fired engines, and then maybe even producing even more carbon, which is not a big deal at the moment. But with the sheer amount of numbers of data centers, I think it will become an issue. And we already see that some communities on the East Coast are pushing back on data centers because of high electricity rates, because of the heat that gets ejected by the data center, some noise and all this stuff. So I think it is smarter to really think long term and what technologies could contribute in a microgrid to get a more sustainable solution. I think that's short-sighted at the moment, that everyone just pushes natural gas-fired engines without any CHP, some without any renewables, and then probably having big challenges in the future here.
Because that's the beauty of a microgrid, right? You can have multiple resources, so one can complement the other.
That's right.
Yeah. How much clash of culture are you seeing out there? You know, hearing that the tech world and the energy/microgrid world are just very different in how they move and their speed and thinking. Are you finding that to be true?
Definitely. And I think that's the good thing, because in the microgrid world, we also used to speed to some extent. So we build microgrids within a year. And I think that's the time frame that also data centers are looking for. So I think the data center world and the microgrid world is aligned on the speed here. I think the challenge is more like, and sorry to say this, on the utility side, probably because of regulation and other things, which makes it very slow. And the studies that we have seen is suggest that it takes 8 to 10 years to upgrade the infrastructure. So yes, there's a clash here between the utility world and the data center world, but I think there's an alignment between the microgrid world and the data center.
It's interesting how many industries, when they start to get involved with utilities, are shocked by the sheer level of regulation they have to deal with. It's a different world entirely. So another thing we hear about in terms of data centers is they're facing a lot of community opposition right now. And one of the issues is water. How can smarter microgrid design help address that concern?
Yeah. So I think it's not directly a microgrid issue. I think the water issue is going back to the cooling towers, which some still use for cooling the data center, but I think it's not needed because the cooling tower is just an open system which uses a lot of water to cool the data center. But there could be closed loop systems which are way more efficient in terms of water usage. And then this problem would go away anyway. And I think I see some regulation in some states which deal with this and actually want to ban these cooling towers. So they might go away to some extent, and then also the water problem goes away. But when it comes to cooling in terms of microgrids, I think absorption chillers might be a solution, which are directly coupled to the CHP systems, to these combined heat and power units. So instead of just using a natural gas engine and let's say wasting 50% of the energy for heat, which just goes out into the air, we could run a CHP system, capture some of this heat, and run it in an absorption chiller. So we can increase the system efficiency by this. So we make it more efficient and we need less fuel. So we create less environmental problems if we would use a CHP system and absorption chiller. And if absorption chiller runs in a closed loop system, then the water problem is also gone. So I mean, and we're currently working on studies to calculate the savings in terms of reduced ejected heat to the environment, and absorption chillers and CHP system can, to some extent, reduce the heat that gets rejected into the environment. And if you use the right cooling technology, you get completely rid of the problem with the water anyway.
It's so interesting. CHP, I've been writing about it for decades. I used to do an annual book with actually Renewable Energy World and the International District Energy Association. And I remember back then it was, we have to do this book because it's just such an underappreciated technology. And it's still such an underappreciated technology. It has so much to offer, especially these days, as you're describing with data centers. Let's jump back to utilities a little bit. We're still seeing out there utility skepticism about microgrids. Why do you think that is? What's the problem there?
Well, at the end of the day, if you're a utility which is not unbundled or deregulated, I mean, they're losing some revenue because if you build a microgrid, they're selling less energy, right? And if in some cases the infrastructure costs are based on the upgrades, then if you avoid upgrades in the system, then of course the rates also not increasing like they could increase. So, I mean, with microgrids, we are basically taking out some revenues from the utility to some extent, and that's hurting them. At the same time, of course, if they would be forward-looking, it could also defer or completely get rid of some expensive investments, which would further drive the prices up. So it's a struggle for utilities because they're locked in between this, well, I want to capture all my investments and base the rates on this, so make money based on my investments if it's infrastructure, right? And of course, if you're selling energy, then, yeah, well, you're also making less money if you have a microgrid. So they're a little bit locked into this, but at the same time, if you reach really high electricity rates, like, for example, in California, then microgrids will be a solution, are a solution, and we cannot stop them, in my view. So at some point, utilities will have to make a decision if they're part of this game or not. And what we are seeing is some of the utilities are now getting used to this idea and want to be part of the game because they can design microgrids, they can develop them, they can install them, and they can run them for the clients, which means they still can make money. It's just in a different form than before, right? So they need to adjust a little bit their thinking here. And we see some doing this, but I would say the majority of the utilities in the United States are still not seeing the advantages of microgrids.
That's a shame. And maybe these times will change it with so much demand on the grid. More of them will start to see that microgrids would be to their advantage as opposed to work against them.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about big picture here. I'd love to hear how you see the future, Mike, especially given your position. Again, you have so much access to so many companies doing so many different things. What do you see ahead? I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about making the utility grid into more of a platform for distributed energy. Do you think we're heading in that direction?
I think it's a political question. At the end of the day, it needs to be decided. At the moment, I think we have two parallel systems. I mean, we have the traditional utility system, which still talks about becoming more reliable, which I think it is not realistic because we see this on a daily basis that actually they're becoming less reliable. But of course, they want to become more reliable and want to have more investments in the system, but they're always lacking here. And at the same time, we have this parallel system, the microgrids, which are evolving. And it's not very coordinated. And this is a little bit of a challenge because it's a waste of time and energy. So I think at some point we need to align here on a strategy. And in my personal view, I would not invest in a utility system if it's cheaper to build a microgrid and take off burden, right? So this is the thing with the data centers, because if you need 500 megawatts and you need to upgrade the infrastructure, then you do it now and you use the data infrastructure for 50 years, but building a microgrid and then maybe in 10 years when utility upgraded, switching to the utility system is actually a waste of money because you have dual systems here, right? So we need to get this aligned from a political view, from all these regulations. And this is also a reason why we have the Xendee University Week, because we want to show that microgrids play a role and can play a role in certain regions and should play a role. And this is why we need a voice here, because we know that it is cheaper to build microgrids than upgrading the infrastructure, because we already did an internal study half a year ago, and we're at the tipping point where microgrids are cheaper or getting cheaper than just upgrading the infrastructure and then being locked in for 50 years with that infrastructure, which the society has to actually pay for, right? So at the end of the day, I would think we need to be carefully planning this. And of course, microgrids will play a role in this. And as soon as, for example, a data center builds a microgrid, I think it's obsolete to upgrade the infrastructure, because why would you do that? Because if you install for a 500 megawatt data center the microgrid, which can serve the data center 24/7, why would you actually think about upgrading the infrastructure utility unless you just use it as a backup?
So I think if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that this data center phenomenon that's happening now, with data centers adopting more and more on-site power microgrids, it could really influence move toward creating a more decentralized grid or more of a platform-based grid.
Yeah, because what we're seeing is for most of these projects, if you install these engines, you're already establishing a de facto islanded system, right? Because, I mean, if you want to go 500 megawatt, the utility system cannot handle this at the moment. And with redundancy on the generator side, you already have basically a system which can run 24/7 in an islanded mode, at least the projects that we have seen. And if you establish a de facto islanded system, then you're already using the utility as a backup anyway, right? So then why would you then start thinking about upgrading the utility system if it's not needed?
Okay, so let's get into University Week now in our last few minutes, because I think this is going to be a great event. I'm incredibly excited about participating in it. One of the things you said to me that really stood out in my mind is that you want this to be community oriented rather than promotional. Tell me why that was important.
Well, because I just want to see microgrids and distributed energy resources thrive and grow. And this is way bigger than Xendee. I mean, that's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And we need each other. I mean, we really need each other. As I said in the beginning, I need that the clients, our clients, are successful in capturing projects. So I want to give them the knowledge that they need so that they can actually win their projects. And of course, if they win projects, they will use Xendee for the modeling. So it's really a synergy between all these actors and clients, which is very important to grow here together.
Absolutely. And let's talk about some of the logistics, like who should attend?
Everyone who's interested in microgrids, I mean, there will be vendors talking about the technology. We will provide educational sessions about modeling. There will be universities presenting their research. So at the end, everyone who is interested in microgrids, wants to fund them, wants to design them, is a technology vendor, should be part of this conversation. Everyone who wants to basically participate in this future and wants to learn about it, or wants to get a deep understanding about the different aspects, because we also have very specific focus on financing and different technical aspects on microgrids here.
Excellent. And what are the dates and how can people register?
It's June 8th to 12th, and just go to Xendee.com and there you can see all the panels, who is participating, who is speaking, and there you can also register.
Wonderful. And if listeners take one message away from University Week, what do you hope it is?
Microgrids are fun.
I love it. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mike. This was a wonderful conversation. As always, I learned so much from speaking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on the Energy Changemakers podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think differently about the role of distributed energy in our society. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving us a review. You can help us shape the dialogue around energy. Go to energychangemakers.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our community. Together, we can make a real difference in how quickly we can make our grid local, equitable, and clean.